Are you searching for a deeper understanding of your faith?
Inspiring Philosophy is your go-to resource for exploring the rich tapestry of Christian thought.
From biblical archaeology to philosophy of mind, we dive into the topics that matter.
Our content bridges faith and understanding, offering insights into God's existence and the reliability of the New Testament.
Join a community where faith meets reason and discover the answers you've been seeking.
Inspiring Philosophy, where faith meets understanding.
Erase the name. Now every idol sounds the same. A generation on its knees, begging comfort, killing peace. Oh, this is the price of pride, dancing while the truth just dies. We fear the cross, embrace the chain. Our freedom's just another cage. In the ruins, a whisper stands, scarred and radiant, pierced hands. The silence breaks, the dark retreats. The king returned and thunder breaks. Where the last light fading under broken skies, chasing meaning in electric lights. But grace still burns where shadows fall. The dead arise, he conquers all. Take one last breath before the dawn takes back the
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Academy page. Today, we're going to have a pretty chill discussion about miracles and the objections towards miracles. I've been putting out a lot of videos and reels on different miracle accounts, and rather than fighting a bunch of people in Instagram comments, I just figured we can do a stream. So I brought my good friend Caleb with me and my friend Noah with me. Everybody knows who you are, Caleb. Noah, take a second to introduce yourself real quickly, just so people know who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a PhD student in philosophy at Princeton University. I specialize in epistemology and philosophy of religion. And I'm a Christian largely because I think that there's conclusive empirical evidence for vindicatory Christian miracles, miracles that are directly tied to explicit affirmations of the Christian faith or that presuppose central articles of the Christian faith.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Let us know. I don't know if you have any published work or anything like that. But once you do, I'll be. Oh, you do? Good. Then definitely put something out there. Yeah, say something.
I do. So I haven't published anything on miracles yet, but I have published some academic papers. You can see those on my Phil Papers page. If you go to philpapers.org and search my name, Noah McKay, you can see my profile there. And then I also have a website. It's just called, I think it's called noahmckay.wordpress.com, something like that. If you just Google Noah McKay philosophy, my homepage,
it'll show up.
Should be one of the first hits you get. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's just kind of get into it, guys. I didn't really prep too much stuff for this. I just figured we can kind of wing it because a lot of, maybe this will sound a little presumptuous, but the overwhelming majority of objections I get against miracle claims for Christianity are fairly bad. So I made kind of a list of about 40 of them, and I figured we can kind of go through them and we can see what you guys have to say on them. I want to know, we could kind of just have an open discussion on them, kind of a thing. And then people in the chat too, you guys, if you have questions or if there's a specific objection you've heard that you want covered, we can try to kind of go over it today too. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, here's the first one. And it's the typical one that you always hear first. Miracles violate the laws of nature.
I don't know if Noah wants to hit this one first or not, but I mean, this would already go into a whole rabbit hole of what are we counting as the law of nature? Are they prescriptive or descriptive, right? And there's debates about what the definition of a miracle is. I happen to like Robert Larmer's definition about how a miracle is an act of God that's directly caused by God, or at least some supernatural being, I guess you could say, that goes against the typical way that nature works, and that also happens in a context where it's meant to give a theological message, right? So you wouldn't have God just randomly make a unicorn appear in the middle of Times Square. But, if God also did a miracle that was just looked like everyday life, it wouldn't stand out. So you have to have that combination of God doing a miracle where it stands out from how we normally see things, violating laws of nature, and also happens in the context where there's a message. So I think those are the two real criteria that you want to have. But even if we granted that it's a violation of laws of nature, I don't see how that's an objection unless one says that like a law of nature by definition cannot be violated. And I think that's a very outdated definition of laws of nature that Hume was working with in the 18th century. But nowadays, we can violate laws of nature all the time because they apply to closed systems, not open ones. We've slowed down the speed of light in laboratory settings before, right? Everything with that's always contextual. You can say that it would violate the laws of nature for a virgin to give birth unless she's artificially inseminated, in which case it wouldn't be, right? Or it would be a violation of laws of nature for someone to walk on water unless it's frozen, right? Or if they're being held up. So you can always have contingencies. And so if the contingency is just, yes, a person can't rise back from the dead unless God intervenes, that I don't see how it's much of an objection, because it seems like you can always just qualify to say, yes, we're not granting that it just happens spontaneously. We're granting that an outside agent is working within this open system. So I don't really see how that's an objection other than just a definition.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at Joe's comment here. No McKay, more like the freaking way.
I've never heard that one before.
I haven't.
Believe it or not.
That's funny.
It's one of those comments that just, I saw it and it just completely distracted me from everything that I'm supposed to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
I like no said there, Caleb.
Go ahead with what you were going to say.
I was going to say that comment was from Joe Schmid, and he's a good friend of mine. So if people aren't familiar with his content, they should go over to Majesty of Reason and check it out. But
Mhm.
I agree with Caleb's assessment of this objection. If by a law of nature you just mean a generalization that describes the ordinary course of nature, then yeah, we agree miracles violate the laws of nature. But that's not an objection. Unless you think
Right.
there's some reason why God can't act in ways contrary to the ordinary course of nature. But that seems implausible.
Yeah. There's also just, I think if you're up to date with physics, most of the time, most of the models we have of laws of nature they're not of the kind of models that would even say something like God could not intervene with laws of nature, because they're not this prescriptive thing that says reality cannot behave any other way than this.
Right.
Right.
Could
They're
just be a
typically
quantum
descriptive.
fluctuation too. Right.
Right.
I feel like when people say this, they mean it like how Anthony Flew meant it, where like by definition, if a law was ever violated, then it would cease to be a law because it has to be universally applicable. But again, it's just qualifications, because
Yeah.
laws are always qualified by being like closed or open systems. So if you're saying unless it's like an outside force intervening, well, that applies to all laws. So I don't see why that would be a relevant distinction. So it seems like a strange counter to say. Also, last thing I'll say, and that's going to waive a lot of them. It's like you could even conceive of it where it's not a violation of the law, because you could suppose that God, when he created the world, right, maybe he sets it up like a wind-up toy or like an alarm clock, where at time t, suddenly this certain quantum fluctuation will happen and the water will become wine in Canaan at this particular spatial location because of the way that God programmed it, like at the beginning, right? Technically, that wouldn't be a violation of laws of nature, but it'd be such a hyper-specific law that it would stand out as a miracle, right? So like, for all we know, that could be the mechanisms that God uses. We don't know, but that would technically not be a violation of laws of nature. So I just think it's a strange thing to point out.
All right. This next one is one that I actually got recently on a miracle video, like Instagram reel that I put up. And this is, I'm going to summarize the objection like this: science presupposes methodological naturalism.
False.
So go ahead, Noah.
So we should distinguish between methodological naturalism and metaphysical naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
Methodological naturalism is not a proposition. It's not a thesis. It's a way of doing science. A methodological naturalist is someone who, when doing science, always looks for naturalistic explanations, or always proceeds on the assumption that there is a naturalistic explanation available of whatever phenomenon it is that they're studying. So it's more of a practical posture. Metaphysical naturalism is a thesis. It's a claim about fundamental reality. There's some controversy about exactly how to draw the boundaries of metaphysical naturalism, but it's something like the view that the fundamental reality is indifferent to value. So there's nothing like an intelligent agent with goals, such as God, at the fundamental layer of reality. Now, methodological naturalism might be a productive posture in the natural sciences, because oftentimes there are naturalistic explanations available, and discovering those naturalistic explanations can be very illuminating, or allows us to develop new technologies that help people. So there's nothing wrong with methodological naturalism as a practical approach to the natural sciences. But I think that probably what this person has in mind is that science presupposes metaphysical naturalism, that if you believe in miracles, you can't do science, or that the claim that miracles occur somehow undermines the rational basis for science. And that, it seems to me, is just mistaken. Why? Well, because so long as miracles are relatively rare, you're still going to be able to design experiments, test scientific hypotheses, right? So long as ordinarily nature behaves according to, like, nature follows the ordinary course, then in almost all contexts, you don't have to worry about, like, it's not like God's going to reach into the Large Hadron Collider at CERN and like mess up an experiment while it's happening. And we have to we wind up accidentally revising our particle physics because an angel was tampering with the instruments. Like, that's just like, no theist thinks that that's likely to happen. The probability of something like that happening is negligible. And so, miracle believers can say there are such things as laws of nature. There are true generalizations about the ordinary course of nature, and we can study those via the experimental sciences. That's totally compatible with thinking that miracles happen.
You have anything you want to say there, Caleb?
No, I pretty much agree. I was going to raise but Noah pre-anticipated about I think Dawkins has said this too, about if you presuppose miracles are possible in science, then like anything could be a miracle. So it would undermine science because, evolution could be a miracle and biochemistry and everything. And I think Noah's right to say that we're not positing like an occasionalist view where God is hyper fixated and doing literally every little action that happens and event is like divinely caused, right? I mean, maybe he's doing that, but in a way that we can't detect. But the miracle advocate has to say that it stands out from the normal course of nature. You don't have to have this view of God like constantly just doing miracles every 5 seconds, right? You can say that normally he restrains himself.
Right. I mean, think about it this way. Every scientific experiment is vulnerable to human error.
Yeah.
It's always possible that a person has made some sort of mistake or even intentionally intervened to fudge the results of the experiment. But that doesn't undermine our confidence in the scientific enterprise.
Oh, that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
And so it's like the fact that there's just one more person who could, in principle, intervene in a scientific experiment to fudge the result or mess something up, that's not going to undermine the rational basis of science, especially like if the person whose existence we're positing just has no reason to do that, right? It's like God does not have a reason to hijack scientific experiments. I don't know why anyone would be worried about that. Unless you're like Descartes.
Yeah.
All right. You guys ready to move on to the next one?
I am.
Here's another standard one. I have my own take on this, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
First, define extraordinary. I mean, I think that's just a term that's like equivocated, where they mean one thing in the first part of it and then another thing in the second part, right? I mean, it's just extraordinary claims require sufficient evidence, which that just is, probabilistically true.
Yes.
But I think this is why it's important to sort of set our epistemic standards beforehand so we don't move goalposts, to say what kind of evidence do we need and what kind of evidence would we accept. And that's when you get into criteria and stuff like that. So Faye and I are on many, many different streams to talk about like the Lambertini criteria, for example, with healing miracles. So we agree that yes, someone who heard about a miracle story from their boss's cousin's uncle who goes to a church who heard it from some missionary, maybe that's not going to be as high confidence as something where you have pre and post medical documentation. So extraordinary evidence would just be evidence that we would normally accept in any court of law, that's done under controlled conditions, that's attested to by many eyewitnesses who are otherwise credible given our experience with them. I think we need to be more careful because yes, you do have psychological biases and other things that could potentially be misfiring. So yeah, we should certainly be initially cautious and look for alternative explanations. But that doesn't mean that like any theistic explanation is so extraordinary that any other explanation is better. I think that's the thing people commonly infer from that, to say that any naturalistic explanation is better. It's like, well, certainly that seems like obviously false. You could think of plenty of reductios where like hyper skeptical scenarios of aliens doing this, where that just seems like an absurd conclusion. And there's just no reason, I think, unless you just think theism is such an abysmally low prior, I don't think there's any reason to say that every naturalistic explanation conceivable is just prima facie more plausible. That's not at all how scientific reasoning works when it comes to the explanations for things.
You got anything, Noah?
Yeah. On one reading, this claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is true. If by an extraordinary claim you mean a claim whose prior probability is very low.
Nice. There we go.
So it's a claim that would be, if we discovered that it was true, it would be very surprising given our background knowledge. So for example, let's say Caleb comes to me and says he was playing poker, and on the first draw, he got a full house. Okay, that's unlikely, but it's not that unlikely. It's plausible enough, given my background knowledge, that I might just accept it based on Caleb's testimony. But now suppose Caleb comes to me and says, I was playing poker, and 10 times in a row, I got a royal flush on the first draw. Okay, that's an extraordinary claim in the sense that it's very unlikely to be true given my background knowledge. So before Caleb came and told me he'd drawn 10 royal flushes in a row, had the question been put to me whether that had happened, I would have placed my confidence in that claim at near zero, right? And so probably I'm not going to accept this just based on Caleb's testimony. Maybe I'm going to ask the other people who were present for the poker game. I'm going to do some investigation to make sure this isn't a joke, that I'm not dreaming, right? Because those hypotheses are actually more likely, given my background knowledge, than that Caleb in fact drew 10 royal flushes in a row. And so I'm going to need, right, the evidential bar is much higher. Now, are miracle claims extraordinary claims in that sense? Well, I think so. Miracles are extraordinary, and even people like me who believe in miracles still think that they're relatively rare, and that many, probably most, miracle claims are false. And so we should have a high evidential bar for believing in miracles. But what I'm going to say in reply is just that the evidence for miracles is extraordinary. It's extremely powerful. If you want an example, I would encourage people to look up the case of Barbara Schneider. Caleb, have you written anything about the Barbara Schneider case that people can read?
Not publicly. It'll be in the book. I would say that Matthew Adelstein, who's a friend of ours, did a great review on it on his Substack. I provided all the documentation. So that's a great source if you want to look at it with some of the primary sources. It'll be in the book, but the work that I'm working on. But yeah, that's a good one. And Matthew Adelstein is a theist, but another person I think replied to that, and they were an atheist. I forget what their name was. And they were also like dumbfounded. They're like, I don't really have an explanation to this. So dramatic case of an instantaneous, like literally instantaneous healing of someone who's been severely disabled on death's door for, I think, well over a decade, like 15 years, something like that, with many eyewitnesses, pre and post medical records, something that would be medically impossible, like that. So yeah, that would be extraordinary evidence. So like sure, that is an extraordinary claim, but like how often do we get like remarkable claims like that actually have like medical backing from credible doctors, right? Like that would be accepted in any court of law. So, and it often is, because you have medical claims in courts every single day. So yeah, that would be sufficient evidence in that case, so far as I can tell.
Yeah, what's crazy about Schneider's case in particular is that it involves the instantaneous resolution of several related but distinct conditions. So she had a near fatal case, advanced case of multiple sclerosis. That disappeared. At the same time, one of her lungs, which had collapsed, reinflated. All of the atrophy associated with her MS was resolved. And there are more things we could add to the list. I suppose this isn't the place to go into the evidence in detail. But I think when people say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, sometimes that just reveals ignorance about how extraordinary the evidence is. And so, yeah, I think
testimony can be extraordinary, is what that comes down to. Like credible testimony in controlled conditions can be absolutely beat, and that's what is extraordinary when you have scientific claims, right? We'll get. I know that's going to be another objection, so I won't get into that now. But yeah, you can absolutely.
Yeah.
That's just one example, by the way.
There's so many. We've covered.
Like
we've covered so many on this channel, and I'm sure like people have heard Caleb cover so many.
Yeah.
I'm actually tempted just to make like a documentary style video on them, going into like really niche detail, not like the pop level like Christian documentaries about a lot of these medical like.
I mean, like technical medical, like
very technical, and getting like doctors on the video and everything too, to actually who specialize in specific pathologies. I'm tempted to do that.
That'd be cool.
All right. Here's another one, and it's related to what we were just talking about. But actually, before I go there, I love that you went that route, Noah, because that's the route I always go is, hey, if all you mean by extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence is that claims with a low prior probability need evidence that the likelihood ratio overcomes the prior probability for, we're in agreement. That
Right.
I just translated in Bayesian terms, and then we can just move on. Okay, here's the next one related to what we were just saying. Eyewitness testimony is unreliable.
I mean, that's going to be like super. It's one of those that's like, it is partially true, and that's why I think it sticks, because there is a hint of truth to that. Like often, yes, people have been wrongly convicted for eyewitness testimony. If you're having testimony that's from a distance or in bad lighting or happened many, many years ago, or it was someone you didn't know, there's plenty of conditions where it would be unreliable, or it was a stranger. But we can't say that's true with everything, because ironically that would be self-defeating, because the studies in which eyewitness testimony has been shown to be unreliable were themselves observed by eyewitness testimony and published in journals. So you can't say simpliciter. And of course, that would just lead us to radical skepticism, because we use eyewitness testimony every moment of every day of our lives, right?
Yeah.
People tell me stuff all the time that I don't go and painstakingly try to verify every independent claim. There's no way you could do that. You couldn't do a history, right? I couldn't prove anything happened prior to my own existence. So it's ridiculous to say that it's unreliable. It can be unreliable, but this is why, again, I think it's important that we get conditions in advance. We've talked about eyewitness testimony in a way that is under controlled conditions, like we would in a laboratory, where you have pre and post medical records, where someone is observing them and using instruments, right? Not just the senses. You know, if someone who's doing a blood test or whatever to verify that the tumor's gone. Under those conditions, eyewitness testimony is highly reliable, especially if the person has a track record of being reliable. So you can't just say prima facie that eyewitness testimony is always unreliable. And again, like don't saw off the tree that you're sitting on, because that would affect almost all scientific claims as well that you can't independently verify if that's the case.
Yeah. No, you got anything?
I agree with everything that Caleb said. I'll also note that there are certain criteria we can use to filter out testimony that's likely to be unreliable or that's likely to be distorted. And we can make our case based on testimony that has markers of reliability. So here are some markers of reliability. First, the testimony is to something that's very easily perceptible in conditions that are highly conducive to perception. So, for example, someone who is investigating the stigmata of St. Padre Pio up close. We have someone saying that they would swear in court that they could read a text through the perforation in his hands, right? That's not the sort of thing that it's easy to be mistaken about, right? Whether somebody has a full thickness perforation in the center of their hand through which you could read text, that's not the sort of thing that an ordinary observer in perceptually conducive circumstances would be mistaken about. So that's one thing. Another thing we can check for is how early the testimony is, how much time has passed between the event that's alleged to have occurred and when the testimony was written down. So if it's within hours or days, it's very unlikely, well, all else being, it's less likely that distortions have crept in, that confabulation has altered the memory that the person is reporting. So I think some of your viewers may be familiar with the miracle of the sun at Fatima. In that case, some of our best testimony comes from a journalist named Almeida, who witnessed the event and published an article about it the next morning, which was drafted the previous evening. So his testimony comes to us within hours of the event that he is reporting. Speaking of Almeida, it also bolsters the credibility of eyewitness testimony if the witness is hostile to what they're reporting, if they're reporting something against their own interest, which was true of Almeida, right? Because he wrote for O Século, which was an anti-clerical Portuguese newspaper. And he had earlier published an article ridiculing those who expected a miracle to happen at Fatima. And so here we have testimony written within hours from a hostile witness. That's very valuable. We could continue to extend the list, but what I'm trying to highlight here is a blanket statement like eyewitness testimony is unreliable it's way too imprecise to use as a basis for dismissing miracle claims. Yes, some eyewitness testimony is unreliable, but some eyewitness testimony is highly reliable. And in order to dismiss the testimony to miracles, you're actually going to have to go through and show that it has the features of unreliable testimony rather than the features of reliable testimony. And I think in most of these cases, the testimony we're relying on has all or many of the markers of reliability. Oh, one more thing I'll mention is just convergence. If you have multiple witnesses who all report like the same details, that's very unlikely to happen by chance, right? If they're lying or if they're confabulating, the details aren't going to correspond exactly. I know Caleb right now is doing some research. Oh, can I say this? Is this public?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Caleb's doing some research right now on Our Lady of Zaytun, which is a Marian apparition in Egypt in the 1970s. And there we have really striking cases of convergence between eyewitnesses who, as far as we know, didn't speak to each other. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with the argument from undesigned coincidences.
Oh
for
yeah,
reliability.
they are. I was going to say, I actually make an argument from undesigned coincidences for this miracle.
I was going to say, well, Fan, I'll show you that before it comes out, because I have I think at least 6 or 7 different examples where I have charts, and this was painstaking to do because it took me forever. But sometimes these are one of them is an Arabic source, one of them is an English source. You have these crowds here, sometimes tens of thousands of people spread out, right? And you'll have them where they're on the same night, you can find timestamps where this person at 10 o'clock at night says that it looked like this. And then at 1 a.m., someone else says it looked like that first stage and then changed to another stage. And another person says it looked like that. And basically you can timestamp it to what hour the apparition looked like based on the testimony. It converges of when it switched over, what time it ended. And so you get these really cool things, right? Or you have one where someone will say oh, it lasted for 2 hours. Another one says, oh, it ended at 5 o'clock. And then you look at when it started and it adds up to 2 hours. These very subtle things that seem like they're not at all coerced, right? So imagine taking just someone at a football stadium, that group of people, and seeing if you could get them to converge on that for an event that they didn't actually see or misperceive. So that seems highly plausible if it's not accurate testimony.
So Noah, you don't know about this. Caleb knows about this. This has been a project I've been working on for a little bit of time here, actually. I'm trying to take a statistical approach to undesigned coincidences, really similar to what Luke Vandewey and Jason Wilson have done with onomastics, if you're familiar with that.
Yes, onomastic congruence.
Yeah, actually, well,
that's a really good argument.
I worked with Luke Vandewey and Jason. We have a peer-reviewed book being published by Zondervan. The manuscript just went in on onomastics. It'll be out in 2028, most likely.
Wow, congrats! That's very exciting.
It is very exciting. I'm super blessed to be part of a project.
You'll be an actual published scholar now. You can say that.
You can shamelessly plug your book on every stream.
But I'm working on a paper very similar structurally to that with undesigned coincidences, but it'll be in a Bayesian mode. And so basically, I'm using all the stuff that I found through the work I've been doing on that for this new miracle claim because of the undesigned coincidences that I found here. So we should talk more about that offline if you want.
Wait, for the one I'm talking about or for a different one?
For what?
For the miracle claim that I'm talking about, or you mean for a different one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were doing that. Okay, well, we'll talk about that then.
Yeah, we'll talk more offline. I don't want to spoil too many things.
No, you're good. I didn't realize you were doing that. That's really cool. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So these next two they sort of methodologically touch, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to say both of them. It'll sound like it's the same thing, but they're poking at two different things, but it's all related. It's so related that I don't know if you can truly separate it, if that makes sense. So miracles have an extraordinarily low prior probability, and miracle testimony can never rationally overcome a uniform experience.
So that's just Hume's argument in 2 points, basically. And
yeah,
so
exactly.
From that, he concludes that a testimony would never be sufficient to justify a miracle because it's never going to reach the level of our
right. The two sides of the coin are miracles have a low prior probability, and testimony is not strong enough evidence. If you're going to put this in Bayesian terms, you might put a cap on the likelihood ratio that can actually be achieved through miracle testimony.
I mean, I'll take the second one first, and I know Noah will have thoughts on this about we've already kind of covered the testimonies and reliable objections. So again, I think it just under the right conditions it can be. And I know Noah's made this point as well, talking to people, so you can elaborate on it. But I feel like with that own logic, you could also argue that your own experience, not even testimony, but your own experience wouldn't be enough to justify a miracle if you saw it with your own eyes, because if the priors are low enough, you could be mistaken, right? So like then you get these ridiculous scenarios where like if Jesus himself comes down and every corpse is raised up into heaven in a glorified body, you could still say like maybe I'm just hallucinating or something, right? Just have this like ridiculously skeptical scenario. And and you know what, maybe that's more likely than that happening, because we know people are delusional sometimes, we know people hallucinate sometimes, we know people dream, right? But that seems just absurd. So it's like that alone should tell you that something's wrong with that argument. But with the priors too, it's like, I think it's question begging, because if you look, there's many hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, even just today, not including historically, who've claimed that they've seen a miracle. So when people talk about like our universal experience, it's like, well, who's the our here? Because outside the Western world, and even in the Western world, it's like a third of Americans think they've witnessed a miracle, 50% of doctors. So it's just being extremely presumptuous to just discount every testimony for that. But even if we grant that, I think that that probability is not always going to be purely frequentist, right? So it's not always, you don't just count up the number of times something happens versus not happen. This is actually the first time in history that us three have been on here at 5:41 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'm wearing this shirt and have this particular drink. Like you can get a hyper specific one where that's a unique event, but that's trivially true. So if you're saying like this particular miracle is like never happened before, that's fine. If you're saying like God in general doesn't interact with the world as a category, well, that's going to be much more contestable among theists, right? So I think the priors come down to categories, not to like how specific we have to give the event, right?
Yeah,
so that's a lot of it.
100%. One of the things that I always bring up, especially related to what you're talking about, Caleb, is that there's if you get into the philosophy of probability, right? Statistical probability is one kind of probability. And if you're a pluralist about probability, right? Even if you have something, yeah, I agreed. Thank you, Noah. Then something can be statistically infrequent and still have a high prior, for instance.
Yeah.
There are cases where you can have something like that. But I'm not going to dork out too much on that. I'm just going to say that and let Noah talk now.
I agree with what Caleb has said. I'll just add a book recommendation. If people want a book-length critique of Hume's argument against miracles by a very capable philosopher, they should look at the very aptly titled book, Hume's Abject Failure, by John Earman, published with Oxford University Press. And he goes through some of the critiques that Caleb has offered. Yeah, I think
there are Christian, by the way, I'll point that out. He's an agnostic, so he himself is not a proponent of like theism, but he's like, I'm not a theist, but this is just a bad argument. So
that's right. Yeah, I mean, there are so many problems with it. It would take, if we wanted to talk about all of them in detail, it would take the entire rest of the stream.
I don't know why I just thought about this, because if you guys know Dr. Tim McGrew, him and I are actually going to be doing another. We will most likely be writing a paper together on this topic.
Oh, that's
as well.
So cool! I didn't know you were doing that, man. That's awesome.
There's two papers we're going to write together. Actually, one's going to be on the problem of evil. One will be on this topic.
Can we segue the problem of evil into like one of these other objections? Do you have that on the list, or is that?
Do you want to talk about testimony and how it's just not going to be evidentially powerful enough to
I think we kind of covered that with testimony isn't like
well how
I mean
because I want to try to steel man this point a little bit more, because what if somebody wants to say that there's just going to be some sort of an evidential cap to testimony, like they might say something like there might actually be some diminishing returns, like if you have maybe 20 people that testify to some miracle, well, what are the odds that you actually have 20 people that the evidence actually locks up that neatly and it's actually a miracle account versus they've conspired and they got everything together really neatly or something like that?
Again, I feel like you could
actually our statisticians try to use arguments like this.
Yeah, I feel like you could play this game though with any like unique scientific discovery, right? Like how many people will have to do a science experiment where you could say like, well, but surely they got it wrong or lying or whatever. It's like at some point that's got to bottom out. And if you're only going off of your experience and not a testimonial, then that also undermines your experience like the natural world, because there's lots of things in the scientific realm that I've never observed atoms under a microscope. I know the people who claim that they have, like the entire institution, right? But this is where you get into like skepticism towards like I don't want to get, like vaccines and modern medicine and people who just think that like it's all a conspiracy. It's really just conspiratorial thinking at that point. And I think that reduces you to believing a lot about other absurd things.
Yeah.
I agree.
Go ahead, Noah.
I agree. I'll also add that stipulating that there's a cap on the strength of testimonial evidence just seems like arbitrary and unmotivated to me. Testimonial evidence is just one kind of evidence. You can even think about it as just empirical data that itself needs to be explained. So I have 20 people here. They're all claiming to have seen an amputated limb regrow, as happened in the miracle of Kalanda.
It's not even a hypothetical. There's actually a case for that happening.
Right. No, I'm describing a real case.
Yeah.
So we should not draw like an arbitrary boundary between testimonial evidence and other kinds of evidence. We should just ask ourselves, okay, here's a fact. 20 people claim to have witnessed this. What's the best explanation of that fact? There are lots of reasons why people might claim to have witnessed an event like this. So let's go through the potential explanations and see how plausible they are. And I think oftentimes what skeptics neglect to realize is that some of the explanations they have to offer for why people would make the claims that they're making and why those claims would converge are just like completely ridiculous. They're absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
especially, sorry to cut you off, but especially so once you actually take into account the texture and the quality of the testimonial evidence, because there's a huge conflation that typically happens with between 20 people said something or X number of people said this, and person one testified to detail XYZ at this point in time about this and actually saw this, and person two independently corroborates this, and you get the point. It's like the texture of the testimony really matters, because you're going to have to explain a lot more than just the healing itself. You're going to actually have to explain the texture of the testimony as well, which I would argue then is actually going to make your countering explanation drastically more bad in terms of the prior probability.
Right. I think anyone who is, again, drawing a boundary between testimonial evidence and all the other kinds of evidence and claiming that there's some sort of ceiling on the strength of this kind of evidence, but not on the strength of this kind of evidence, I think that person is just making an arbitrary stipulation because they want to avoid conceding that miracles happen. And I would just need to see like some independent motivation for capping the strength of the evidence that way. I just can't see what it would be.
Remind me later in our group chat to send you guys a really cool paper I found where it actually directly refutes this idea that testimonial evidence is kind of special. The author of the paper, I forget his name, actually makes this argument that our own sense experiences are a form of testimonial evidence to our actual selves. It's really interesting. So just remind me later.
Now, I should note that there are some philosophers who do think testimony should be placed in a different bucket than other kinds of empirical evidence. They think that testimony is its own sui generis source of knowledge. But the important thing is, almost without exception, those philosophers think that testimonial evidence is stronger than other kinds of empirical evidence. That actually you're entitled to believe the content of testimony without establishing that the best explanation of the fact that the relevant person testified is that the proposition to which they testified is true. So like skeptics can point to philosophers who say, oh no, actually there is actually a difference between testimonial evidence and other kinds of evidence. But those philosophers aren't going to be on their side, because those philosophers are going to say that actually testimonial evidence should carry more weight, not less, precisely because it's its own sui generis source of knowledge or justification.
Awesome. All right, Caleb, just because you said problem of evil, I'll lump a axiological expectation mismatch type objection together, right? So it's going to be the combination of, well, why does God heal one person and not another, right? Like, why did Barbara Schneider get healed, but God doesn't somehow miraculously intervene with like a starving child in Africa, or a child that's being targeted by some sort of a genocidal dictator. And on the other side of the coin of the axiological objection would be something like, if God wants to be known, it's almost like a form of divine hiddenness, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, why is it miracles here and there, but they're so ambiguous, you can still object to them? Why don't they happen more often, right?
Yeah, I'll take the first one. I think Noah probably has some good stuff on the hiddenness that I've heard from him before, so maybe he can do that one and comment on anything else. But I am sympathetic in the sense that I think emotionally that is a stronger argument, because, like, yeah, it's great to hear stories about that, but when someone you know and love is suffering from that, telling them stories where other people were healed is not going to be always helpful, So we should always be praying for those people and trying to be with them every step that we can. So I understand why that would absolutely hit home with someone who knows someone who's suffering from that. But just purely epistemically, I don't think it even follows from that causally to say that, look, how many cases of God not intervening, so therefore we're justified in thinking he didn't in this case, right? To give you an example in medicine that's pretty like widely used, is that there's a whole field of medicine called pharmacovigilance. And that's where we find side effects to new drugs, right? So whenever you have those ads where they're playing the happy music and they list all the side effects, it's meant to help your heart pressure, but can also kill you and all this other stuff. I was listing that. They have to do lots and lots of clinical trials. And inevitably you'll have, an outlier in the sample who had some adverse side effect, right? But if you were to imagine like 100 patients, let's say, who take a new drug, and 98 of them improve, and 2 of them end up 20 minutes after they take the drug, have a seizure and develop like profound internal bleeding, right? I don't think it would be wise to say, well, given that 98% of the sample didn't have any adverse reactions, we cannot possibly causally infer that in the 2 cases we have here, that the drug had nothing to do with it, that they purely got seizures and started bleeding internally 20 minutes after the drug purely by coincidence, right? It's like, no, it seems very plausible given that the effects are profound and significant, assuming that they didn't have an underlying condition or something like that. That would be a very dramatic effect and be something that would be worth noting. And so you can say, because it was temporally related to it, it was like 20 minutes afterwards, and the effects were so profound, we can make a causal inference to say that the drug probably contributed to those side effects. And so then we would have to list it, right? And we can speculate, so we don't exactly know why did these 2 people get these side effects and not the 98%. Maybe they have some underlying genetics that we don't know about. Maybe there's something else the way they took it. There's plenty of things you could hypothesize that are fairly plausible, right? In the same way, you could say, I don't know why God healed Barbara Snyder and didn't heal other people I know who have MS. Like I can't give you like a hyper specific definition, but I think you can generally talk about theodicy and about why God in most cases lets us be able to do good works and try to use our free will to help other people, because in a world where God healed everyone, we wouldn't have doctors and you miss out a lot of virtues. So I think that there's non-silly, fairly plausible reasons you can think of for why God would not heal most people and yet may still give signs of miracles, right? But I think that those speculations about God's psychology are far more plausible than speculations about why this dramatic, medically unprecedented thing happened immediately after prayer without any like known mechanism. So I think comparing those hypotheses, the naturalist is going to be a much worse boat. Just like with the drug example, we might not know exactly why these 2 people had this side effect, but making that causal inference is much more plausible, even without knowing everything, than it would be to say, no, the drug had no effect and we're going to posit something completely independently of it. That seems much, much worse. So,
yeah. I want to hear what you're going to say, Noah. I just want to say something before it escapes my mind. That's all. There's a few other things that I kind of tack on with what you're saying, because I know my theodicy, Caleb, and a lot of our viewers kind of know what I do with theodicy. But on top of this, I also kind of do a type token distinction type thing. And so I might just say something like, hey, if I have the type miracles, right, I might just assign a relatively modest conditional probability of the type given theism, right? But then whatever token instance you can conceive of, the conditional probability of that is going to be very low once you get more specified, right? But still the token's conditional probability is still high, or modest if you want to say that. And so I think there's also like a probabilistic issue when it comes to these like that counterfactual question, because then you can kind of frame it this way. Well, why did God choose to do this particular token instance versus this token instance? And you can come up with tons of reasons for all of those, but I think at the end of the day, each of those token instances are going to have a relatively similar conditional probability, all else being equal. And then there was one more thing I wanted to say, but it's escaped my mind now. Shoot. I didn't take my meds, my ADHD meds, so my mind's gone all over the place.
How do we know the ADHD meds help then? It could just be a coincidence causally. We can't establish that because there's people who take it and don't have anything happen to them.
It's true. It's true.
I might as well say that. Yeah.
Yeah. If it comes back, I'll say it. Noah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what's been said so far. I'll just add two things. First, we can concede that the fact that some people aren't healed when they pray is some evidence against theism, or it is some evidence against the claim that God heals people. But some evidence doesn't mean sufficient evidence, it doesn't mean conclusive evidence. So the question is just, is the positive evidence that miracles occur strong enough to overcome this datum? And the answer is just yes. I mean, as we talked about before, I think people are almost always vastly underestimating the strength of the empirical evidence for miracles. So we can go back to Caleb's analogy. Suppose that you give somebody a drug during a clinical trial and they don't develop a rash. Okay, that is some evidence that the drug doesn't cause rashes, that a rash is not a side effect of the drug. Maybe you have 50 people who take the drug who don't get rashes. It is going to be true that in every one of those cases, you're getting some evidence that rashes are not among the side effects of the drug. Nevertheless, if 10 out of 100 people who participate in the clinical trial get a rash after taking the drug, that's sufficient evidence that's enough to establish that, yes, a rash is one of the side effects of the medication, despite the counter evidence that's available, right? And so I think we should just say the same thing about miracles. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, I think people underestimate the prevalence of miracles. Now, I do think miracles are rare. I agree with that. Most of the people who ask for miracles don't get them. But miracles aren't as rare as people think they are. So I forget the exact date of this study, but Pew Research did a survey of Christians in 11 countries.
2006, I think.
2006?
Somewhere around there, yeah. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and they found that in those 11 countries, I forget exactly what the combined population of those countries was, but they found that 200 million people in those 11 countries claimed to have witnessed a miracle. Not 200 million people in those countries believed in miracles, but 200 million people in those countries believed that they had seen one. And then there was a similar survey of medical doctors in the United States from a few years back that found 55% of American medical doctors claim to have witnessed a miracle. Again, it's not that 55% of American medical doctors believe in miracles. It's that 55% of them believe they have seen a miracle. That's a very large number, right? So suppose that there's some phenomenon you're interested in determining whether it's genuine, whether it's real, and then you find out hundreds of millions of people worldwide claim to have witnessed this, including more than half of the trained observers who are best situated to identify the phenomenon. Okay, that's pretty powerful stuff. Just based on that alone, I think your prior should be higher than skeptics often assume. Right? Skeptics often try to justify an extremely low prior in miracles. This is part of what Hume is doing, actually, in his work of miracles. He's trying to establish a prior so low that it can't be overcome by any likelihood ratio in principle. And he's doing that by saying there is no credible testimony to miracles. No one's ever witnessed it, right? Which is part of why the argument is terrible, because obviously it's question begging in this context to claim that no one has ever experienced.
But you can't count those people, no. Yeah, it's
right.
Like
because they're barbarians and they're peasants and they're
yeah.
Right. Which is not like, it's just not true.
Yes.
Yeah, he would get canceled today if he said that. But
Oh, absolutely, and justly so. I might add. I think Of Miracles is one of the worst pieces of philosophy ever written. By an accomplished philosopher. I'm sure some amateur philosophers have written worse, but as far as like prominent influential philosophers go, I think Hume in Of Miracles probably takes the cake.
I showed you that picture. I don't know if you saw it in our group chat, Noah. When I was in Edinburgh, I went to go visit the Hume statue, and the local populace put a traffic cone on top of his head and wrote dunce on it.
Well, yeah. Now we shouldn't. I don't think Hume was a dunce. He was a very smart guy, and in his defense, he did write a lot of philosophy. And when you write a lot of philosophy, you're bound to have a few flops. So I'm not trying to be down on all of David Hume's philosophy, although I disagree with almost all of it. I'm just saying, like, this particular work of his, I think was a mistake.
I wasn't implying that. I wasn't implying that that's what you were saying or how I'm receiving it. That was just a funny picture that I took.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. But then, like, so one more thing I want to say that I just thought of is, oh, now I forgot it. Okay, let's see. There were two things. One, we can concede that the relative lack of miracles is some evidence against the claim that miracles are genuine. Second, I think miracles are more prevalent than people often assume. So here's a third point that I think is worth stressing. Suppose that everyone who prayed for a miracle got one. Then I think it would be much more plausible to hypothesize that there's some sort of natural mechanism associated with prayer that underlies these healings. Like maybe human beings have, I don't know, psychic abilities, or maybe the body has some extraordinary ability to heal itself that's unlocked by certain brain processes that are only active during prayer. And basically prayer is like a technology that humans have developed over time to accelerate healing. That sort of hypothesis, although it would still be kind of out there, would be a lot more plausible if healing in response to prayer was very consistent. But the fact that it's inconsistent, that's actually better predicted by the assumption that miracles are the result of free choices made by an agent who has reasons for and against intervention, and he's deciding whether to intervene on a case-by-case basis.
Gotcha.
I'm not all that sure that this fact about the distribution of miracles really helps naturalism all that much. I think it probably does a bit, but I think the best case for theists would be if maybe not everyone got healed, but a greater proportion or something.
Yeah. All Christian ones were answered, but other ones weren't or something, maybe. But it's still good. I'm curious to just go off of that real fast, Stan, before you say, well, Noah's in that point. To just ask Noah, like, I don't know if you have this, I'm guessing you probably don't have this in your objection stand, but people often cite, because I hear this all the time, like the Benson prayer study from 2006, where they,
it's in there.
Oh, it is in there?
Yeah.
Okay, then we can get
to that. You can cover that really quick if you want. Go ahead.
Well, if we're going to reference it, then we'll just get out of the way, because it kind of goes with what Noah was saying. But if that's how Noah would respond about God's like willingness to do, because if for those who aren't familiar with it, it's like they had this study where they had a bunch of cardiac patients and they had control groups. They had one group that was going to get prayed for, one group that wasn't prayed for, and one group that was prayed for and like didn't know that they were going to get prayed for or not. Right. No known prayer, no prayer at all. The other two didn't know if they were going to get it or not. And they basically concluded, like, when you do that, there was no difference statistically in the recovery rates between those who were prayed for and the ones who were not. Right. So that's like, oh, prayer doesn't work. Right. But I think that you're right, Noah, to say that we can't. I mean, there's also just methodological issues to say that you can't control for background prayers, because it seems ridiculous to think that
Mhm.
only the prayer group's going to get prayed for. Like what they can't pray for themselves. Their family members aren't going to pray for them. Like there's no way you could actually like enforce that ethically. And even if you could, it's like God, as you said, doesn't have to jump through our hoops. So we're not predicting ahead of time, like that we know God's going to intervene in this case. That's why you have to do it retroactively to say in a case study, it looks like God intervened here, but we can't predict ahead of time who God will and will not heal. And Swinburne wrote a critique of that himself, where he's like, because you were doing this in an experimental setting, maybe that's a good reason why God didn't intervene, because you weren't sincere in your prayers. You were doing it just as test to see what would happen. So that kind of made me think of that when Noah brought up God's willingness to intervene or not. But
Another thing, now it's been years since I've read the Benson study.
Yeah.
So Caleb can correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to recall that in that study, the participants were given scripted prayers,
yes,
and the people offering the prayers were from a diverse range of different religious traditions. So some of those praying were Hindu, some of those praying were Muslim. Now, if that's true, then here's one potential explanation for the null result. An exclusivist religion is true, like Christianity. And what God didn't want to do is, in a peer-reviewed study, vindicate the wrong religion. It's like there's a reason he could have. Now, again, people should go fact check me on that, because again, it's been years since I've read the study. But I think that's sort of like, yeah, I mean, as a Christian and as an exclusivist Christian, and by that I mean not necessarily the people who aren't Christians can't be saved, but that Christianity is the only religion that's true. I wouldn't have expected a really strong positive result from that study, given the way it was organized.
Yeah. Something that I just remembered what I wanted to bring up, and it actually ties in really neatly with what you're talking about, Noah. And I brought this up on the last stream that I did on miracles last week. I had Dr. Ryan Mullins come on, and I showed him miracle claims and he's never like really looked into them. So it's really fun to do that. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is, like, when I think about divine hiddenness, I also just think about psychology and how it could actually be interwoven into the discussion a little bit more. So, like, for instance, Eleanor Stump, one of the big things that she talks about, right, is this difference between Dominican and Franciscan knowledge. So, like, I can know propositions, but I can also have this experiential knowledge of something or someone. I can know that fire burns, and I can know what it feels like to be burned. I can know true things about Caleb, but Caleb's one of my really good friends. He's one of my best friends. We're really close. So I know Caleb, right? Caleb knows me in a much more different experiential way than many other people do. And the point that I want to make here is that, what if, for instance, we stipulate that one of God's goals is to be known experientially as a person? And so when you go out and start testing for whether or not when God is going to do miracles or anything like that, this is explicitly going against God's goals. It would actually go against God's goals to do shows of power, because that would actually make him not known. Rather, people would just know about him. And even when I look at like the biblical narratives and stuff like that, tremendous shows of power are not the things that actually facilitated, for the most part, people putting their faith in God, putting their trust in actually having a fidelity towards him, right? It was actually getting to know him narratively that actually brought that about. The miracles happened, but it was actually that narrative process of getting to know who God is rather than seeing his power that actually brought this about. And I think that goes full circle too into the whole entire point that these miracles are vindications or signs of a religious message or something like that. Yes, there's miracles of mercy and all that, but putting this all together, because I think what ends up happening is some people might have an intuition that you might actually see a lot more people being healed. And I don't know if I share that intuition based off what I know about how humans operate and how power operates and all this other stuff, and how certain power, even social power and stuff like that, can actually get in the way of knowing each other.
Yeah.
So I'm going off on a little bit of a rant here. Hopefully this all connects, Noah. So let me know what your thoughts are here. So I'll use this as an example. Most of the time in my church, for instance, people know what I do for work. They know that I do this type of ministry work. And then next thing you know, you're kind of put into a social hierarchy. And that comes with a little bit of a cultural, social power. And then that power dynamic actually makes it extremely lonely for people, because I can't truly be known because people come for the thing that I can offer. But then there's all these social expectations, all these other things. And next thing you know, people are both masking and they can't truly know each other. Not saying God has to mask or anything like that, right? But I'm sure you can see how that analogy then can extend even to the domain of miracles. Because if people are coming to God for power and miracles and all these other things, and as God is to be known, it seems like the frequency of miracles are actually going to be not as drastically high as somebody's prima facie intuitions would be.
Yeah. Are you saying that people come to Christ like demanding a sign, versus coming because they genuinely want to see that change? Noah actually might be able to, he knows more about Fatima than I do, but maybe this would be a good example, Noah, too, with the stuff where it's like Our Lady does this big sun miracle, right? And what does she like have? She wants people to repent, right? And yet how do most people react when they say that? It's like, oh, this is so cool. And they kind of just go off and live their lives. Like, it's like a wonder. It was like, oh, that was neat. But there's no like radical transfer for most, not for all of them. But so I think in the same way, people want to see something cool, but like, are they willing to take on the sacrifice that comes with it? If you want to be Thomas and touch the wounds of Jesus, then go ahead, but you might end up getting crucified upside down or something if you have that level of evidence. So I think that God gives us enough evidence for the degree of culpability that we want to do. And one more thing with the hiddenness too, that I don't think this gets said a lot, but it's something I've noticed in the history of miracles. Many of the critics, including Hume, attack the witnesses basically just as an ad hominem, because I think God does lower himself intentionally to show himself to like the least of these in most societies, right? Who are the first ones to find the tomb of Jesus empty? The women. They're also not believed because they're women. And that culture, women's testimony was generally speaking not taken very seriously. Hume writes off the testimony of Africans, of Arabs, of the uneducated. He even mentions cases where there are doctors and educated people who attest to it, and he still dismisses it. But people basically use that historically, right? Even at Lourdes, where there's medically documented healings, the longest naturalistic explanation, like the late 1800s, early 1900s, was female hysteria, to say, well, women are just, inclined to be emotional, and all these diseases come through emotion and hysteria, and so that's why it happens. And people are just credulous, et cetera, et cetera. Even today, you get that. Even with Zaitun, there was one quote from a Marxist sociologist that I thought was funny, where he talks about how, like, oh yeah, had this report happened in like Lower Egypt, where like the educated people, where the peasants lived, I could understand it. But I'm so perplexed that so many educated, well-respected people have seen this and believe it. Like it's like crazy. And so I think that people have this snobbery, and I've seen it myself, and I'm sure Noah and Than have too, where they just have this dismissal tone because they think it's just better for that. And it's like, well, if I saw it, that's how it'd be. But why is it always these uneducated cultures who still practice witchcraft or whatever? So I think it is attacking the person. I think that there's some virtue for God to, like, again, I'm not saying be credulous and believe every claim, but like for God to say, no, you have to humble yourself and trust this testimony of this person. Because if I were to just show it to you, you didn't need them and you didn't have to believe them. So I'm making you humble yourselves to have to resort to taking this testimony that is otherwise credible because of that. So that's a view that I like, that I haven't heard many people say, but I think it's interesting.
Any thoughts, Noah?
Yeah, I think this claim that miracles are by and large reported by the gullible and uneducated is, even if it's true, it's sort of a historical accident. So if you just go back a few centuries in the history of the West, virtually every educated person believed in miracles. And in fact, many of the subjects of the most extraordinary miracles in history were highly educated people. Saints and doctors of the church who were members of the clergy. And so the best educated individuals in their societies. This is certainly not a phenomenon that's limited to underdeveloped countries where everyone's illiterate and uneducated. That's just not true. So like there's a case that I'm investigating right now, a series of miracles and apparitions in Damascus that I'm going to talk about, hopefully, on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel in a couple of weeks. And most of the witnesses to these apparitions and miracles are educated. They include a faculty member at the UCLA School of Medicine who was one of Ronald Reagan's surgeons. They include an accomplished neurologist from the most prestigious or one of the most prestigious university hospitals in France. They include a team of medical scientists from Norway who came and brought all their equipment and conducted a series of tests. It's just, yeah, the number of credible, well-educated expert witnesses to miracles is very high. And there are cases, there's one example in this case that I said I was investigating of a medical doctor named Jamil Marji, I think is his name. And he was an atheist, a disbeliever in miracles. And then he witnessed one, and he got a hold of the medical documentation and he reviewed it. And he concluded, I guess I was wrong. I guess God really exists and miracles really do happen. And from that day forward, he sort of became one of the primary witnesses of these events. And so, yeah, it's just not even close to true that there are no well-educated witnesses to the miraculous. And in many cases, these people are subject matter experts. Like, they're not just educated, they're the people with precisely the education that makes them best positioned to judge whether the phenomena are authentic.
Yeah.
And Hume knew that, by the way, because Hume himself cites cases like Calanda and one where Blaise Pascal's niece is healed, and like the king's top surgeon investigates it. Like, European ones were doctors who were highly educated, and he still dismisses those too. So it's like,
he does.
I feel like it doesn't even mean that much, or you're just going to say like it doesn't actually matter who's testifying to it at that point. So
yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate conclusion of his argument, right? If you actually buy Hume's argument, you shouldn't think it's even relevant whether the person has expertise, because no matter how credible they are, they're not going to be credible enough to overcome the low prior, which is just ridiculous. I mean,
just saying evidence doesn't matter, basically. Yeah.
Well, it's basically the prior so low that if you are reporting a miracle, you lose your credibility. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, but that's unreasonable though. Like,
it's also circular because it's saying like to test to a miracle makes you prima facie not credible, and it's like, wasn't that just presupposing that miracles aren't credible? Yeah,
for the viewers, for you, dear viewer, should not have a prior in miracles so low that you're as resistant to testimony to the miraculous as Hume was. Metaphysical naturalism, which we discussed earlier, is the prevailing view among academics, at least in the English-speaking world nowadays. But in my opinion, there just aren't good arguments for it. It's just not reasonable. It's at the very least, it's not reasonable to have such high confidence in metaphysical naturalism that you're going to ignore testimonial evidence to the miraculous because you're sure that no matter how strong it is, it's not going to overcome the low prior.
Awesome. Let's do these super chats are a little starting to pile up here, so I'm just going to try to plow through some of them real quick here.
Yeah, and I know that Noah has to leave by the turn of the hour, so definitely.
Yep. Randy Bales with 5 memberships. Thank you. Apollos, you became a member. Based. We got Shekels. Thank you. I still don't know what these jewels are. I don't know. Apollos Christian Apologetics says, Caleb, let me know if you're down to give feedback for my philosophy article, preprint over email. It argues the resurrection is contrast of discriminating evidence for Christianity, and no Swinburne priors used. I actually looked through this. It's really interesting, Caleb. You might like it.
Yeah, if you want to send that to me, Fan, you can also just email me at calebjackson1999@gmail.com. But yeah, Fan, if you have it and he's okay with you.
Yeah, I'll send it over to you. Apollos, I looked through a lot of it. I'm just rereading through it so I can actually give you some good feedback rather than just vibes, basically. So be patient with me there, but I actually really like what I'm reading so far.
Nice.
What's the update on your work on IP, IPA papers, etc.? Are you going to be over here more often? Will this be your main channel for IP? Something else? It's to be determined still. We're bringing on Tim full time starting September 1st, which I'm very excited about. And basically, we're trying to figure out how to balance this all. Because I am a workhorse and I will do everything, but I realized that I probably shouldn't do that because I need to actually have time for prayer and Bible study and to rest and all this other stuff. So we're trying to figure out how to balance everything. There are a few papers I have that are in the works. My theodicy book is still being written. Just be patient, I guess, as we try to figure things out. We're still figuring out what the pacing is going to look like, but I do want to spend a lot more time here because you guys have been asking for more academic stuff and you want to break from some of the pop level Dawa bro stuff too. So physicist here, physics at least is descriptive. It is also incomplete, so you can't really claim it's a complete set of rules as is.
Sure.
Like and subscribe. Narf, hey Than. I don't know what MFLMP is.
ML.
I don't want to take a guess. I don't know if I want to take a guess. Do scientists even say that laws of nature are things that can be violated, or do they typically say that laws are just unintervened tendencies? It depends on the scientist you ask, but a lot of the physicists that I've talked to would probably veer towards the latter option than the former. Would you guys agree?
I don't know enough to say.
Fair enough.
I don't know. Yeah, epistemology of science. I'm not sure what they've been surveys on what they think.
More shekels. Thank you, Jesus is King. More shekels. Thank you. Even more shekels. I don't know, man. I think God was futzing with the rules in our lab so the grad student before me would stick around. More shekels. We're almost through the super chats, guys. You're missing a very important nerd, Ethan Muse. I'm planning on having him on at some point in the future.
Ethan.
So he's super smart.
He's great. He's extremely
he's
knowledgeable.
kind of intimidating, I think, sometimes, but
I can bench more than him. I'm not intimidated.
But yeah, if anybody hasn't yet, they should go check out his Substack. It's called Motiva Credibilitatis, I think.
Yep.
And he also has lots of really excellent YouTube interviews.
Thoughts? Premise 1, certain Catholic miracles are the best and most vindicatory. 2, Catholicism is unlikely due to contradictions and infallible declarations. C, current miracles are poor at vindication. I would deny premise 2, but
I don't know how comfortable Noah is talking about this. I think Than and I are both in some kind of weird positions on thinking about a lot of this.
Yeah, I can't talk publicly about my
I will say that I think the Catholic Church is the most scrupulous body that investigates miracles because they're also just very organized and they have a hierarchy that requires this before like canonization of saints. So I think it's just objectively true that you don't have any other religion that has like a system for like investigating miracle claims like you do at Lourdes or with canonization miracles. So by that aspect, yes, absolutely. I think Catholicism has some of the best attested than any other place.
Yeah, so I recently converted to Catholicism, largely on the basis of vindicatory Catholic miracles. For a long time, I was a Christian, primarily because I thought the empirical evidence for Christian miracles was very strong, but I was mostly familiar with evidence from Protestant sources or with miracles that happen in Protestant contexts. But then I started looking into Catholic miracles and I noticed that first, the evidence for them was at least as good and in some cases orders of magnitude better than the evidence for the miracles I was previously familiar with. And second, that there's these two weird features of many of these Catholic miracles. First, they're attached to explicit affirmations of distinctive Catholic doctrines like papal primacy or the Immaculate Conception of Mary. And second, often these miracles happen on God's initiative. So in most of the non-Catholic cases I'm familiar with, miracles happen as answers to prayer. But in the case of many Catholic miracles, and especially Marian apparitions, which is like a class of miracles that I think is very interesting and that I'm actively studying right now, those happen without anybody asking for them. And that combination of things, first, the miracle is attached to a message with distinctively Catholic content that the miracle is meant to vindicate. And it's like God seems to be going out of his way to promulgate those messages and to vindicate them through miracles. That strongly suggests to me that Catholicism is true. So, and if anybody's interested in hearing about Marian apparitions, again, you should join me on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel in a couple of weeks, where we're going to talk about a little known case that I've been doing a deep dive on that I think just like,
it'll be
basically,
epic.
yeah, it at least constitutes like an empirical demonstration of Nicene Christianity. Well, we have a case where one of the apparitions just recites the whole Nicene Creed. So, you know, that's it. Trinitarianism's true. Game over, everyone who's not an Orthodox Christian.
And it's funny too, because I know we're talking about the Muslim objection, and Fan does all the Islam apologetics about like, well, where does Jesus say "I'm God, worship me"? And Noah was like, actually, if you're counting this particular one, then he explicitly says that in the vision in one of the cases. So there you go.
yeah. But so let me make a comment about number 2. I think that, well, of course, because I'm Catholic, I deny that there are any contradictions among infallible teachings of the Catholic Church. And I do think, like, if you look into many of these, there are very plausible harmonizations available. But I also think that the conspicuous lack of evident contradictions among infallible teachings of the Church is evidence for Catholicism. And here's why. So what we want to do to determine whether the Catholic Church is a divinely sanctioned institution, as opposed to just a human institution, is to compare it to a structurally similar institution that we know is merely human, and see whether there's a comparable number of apparent contradictions among the teachings of these two bodies. Now, I don't know if there are any Mormons in the audience, and I'm not going to make the case against Mormonism right now, but just grant me for now the assumption that Mormonism is not true, right? And so the prophets of the Mormon Church, who are basically really like the equivalent of the Catholic popes, they are not, in fact, infallible prophets. Well, then I think we can just look and compare, okay, how many apparent contradictions do we have in the Catholic magisterium, and how plausible are the harmonizations, versus how many apparent contradictions do we have among the teachings of the Mormon prophets, and how plausible are those harmonizations? And I think it's just like not even close. I think the apparent contradictions in the Mormon case are way more conspicuous, and they're basically impossible to resolve. I'm not going to make the case for that now. I'm just sort of like describing a procedure that can be used to determine, because the problem is this: any body of doctrine that's sufficiently large and sufficiently intricate will contain apparent contradictions, just because of the volume of claims that get made, and because of like the amount of ambiguity that you have to deal with when you're laying out like very intricate, very sophisticated theology. And so you shouldn't expect there to be zero apparent contradictions, even if the Catholic Church is a divine legate. So what you want to ask is the prevalence of apparent contradictions as great as we would expect, given that it's a merely human institution? And I think like comparing it to similar institutions that we know, or we can be reasonably confident are merely human, that's going to help us get an answer to that question. So,
and mind you, with the miracle evidence to the positive evidence, it does seem like if you have ambiguous texts from the Middle Ages that may kind of seem like they contradict, but you can like play with some language and say there's some context here where it's not clear, and scholars debate on this stuff, versus like oh, this host turned into the flesh and blood of Christ, or oh, Mary came down to Immaculate Conception. Like that should be epistemically far more significant or evidentially than these kind of ambiguous word games in terms of what's meant by this, right? It seems like that's like a weird defeater, unless it was something that was like, 2 + 2 is 7. But if it's not that explicit a contradiction, it seems like it'd be really hard to bet your stakes that you have a really solid one that can't be harmonized versus like direct empirical evidence. So
Right. Yeah. I think that's true. I think the overwhelming miracle evidence should just convince you that there are harmonizations available for the apparent contradictions, whether you know what they are or not.
The guy that sent in the super chat just sent in something else I figured I'd bring up too. He says, I think the problem with the plausible harmonizations is that the system is set up such that it's hard to falsify things. You can go back and argue a certain council session wasn't ecumenical, or laying out exactly when a pope is speaking ex cathedra is kind of fuzzy. To my understanding, I would expect exactly this wiggle room for a human institution.
I mean, so it depends on what you mean when you say it's hard to falsify. So the Catholic Church has a very clear set of criteria for distinguishing between ex cathedra statements and non-ex cathedra statements. If a declaration, if the Pope, in his capacity as universal pastor of the Church, presents a doctrine as definitively to be believed by all the faithful, then the proclamation is ex cathedra. I think that probably the reason it seems like the matter is fuzzy is because most of the cases we talk about are the fuzzy cases, right? Because we don't have any reason to talk about whether the cases that are clearly ex cathedra or clearly not ex cathedra are ex cathedra, precisely because it's clear either that they are or that they aren't. And so I think we're sort of getting a biased sample. So if you just go on the internet and read a bunch of articles, people arguing about which things are and aren't ex cathedra, you're going to get sort of a distorted view of how clear the criteria are.
That's good. Also, one point on Mormonism fan is I was told recently I look like Jacob Hansen, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. So just wanted to make sure.
Jacob's a pretty handsome guy. So I would take it as a compliment. We're actually having a debate on the channannel this Saturday.
Are you really? I did not know
Mormonism. Yeah, not with Jacob. Tim is.
Okay.
I'm moderating a debate between Tim and a different Mormon.
Got it.
Okay, let's get back on track, and then.
By the way, actually, I just realized in order for me to make the argument I was presenting earlier, you actually don't have to grant me the assumption that the Mormon Church is a merely human institution. Let's say that it's a divine institution. Then if I can show that the prevalence of apparent contradictions among Catholic magisterial statements is lower, then that's sufficient, right? Now I can show that the rate of apparent contradictions is lower than the rate of apparent contradictions in a body of doctrine that is divinely revealed, namely the teachings of the Mormon Church. So actually, I was too concessive earlier. You don't even have to grant me that assumption. I think even Mormons should accept this argument for the infallibility of the Catholic magisterium.
Nice.
All right. So the last two kind of categories of objections are basically other miracle claims from other religions that might contradict Christianity / like how maybe somebody might say that even if I grant there's a miracle that happened, maybe it's underdetermined for Christianity. How do you know it's not a generic theism or something like that? And then just to get out of the way, the other category is basically the whole and it's more related to the case reports that we would like to talk about sometimes with Chris Gunderson,
Barbara Snyder,
all those, right?
Yeah.
Somebody might just go, well, why aren't these published in medical journals, stuff like that? Those typical, more sociological type objections. So where do you want to start?
They give other information. I think the first one's going to take a little bit longer, so I guess I don't mind hitting on the other ones real fast. Yeah. Also, not to shameless plug, but I have a whole Substack article talked about peer-reviewed miracles in journals. If you want to look at that,
I'm going to look at that because
Yeah, it also
I've
was.
been writing out a video script on this topic.
Oh, have you? Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah, it actually is an excerpt from the book that was. It's not going to be in the book anymore just because of page length, but that I gives you an idea of what it looks like. Short version is a lot of them are published in journals, but I think I give like 3 broad reasons why they're not more common. The first one is that because there's just the lack of interest, which sounds strange, but really, like, if you have a case report, normally the reason that it's reported is because it contributes to the literature and it's meant to like find a mechanism, like, oh, this is weird, why did it happen? Maybe we can find reason. And if it's just, oh, here's this weird thing that happened after prayer and there's no mechanism and we can't replicate it and we can't develop a drug about it, then it's like, okay, you know, most of them are not going to want to fund that or publish it. It just doesn't really contribute anything. Obviously, it's, you know, philosophically it does, but that's not what medical journals care about. It's about pharmaceutical development in most cases. Second one, I think the most common one is that a lot of these actually are, and I give like 5 or 6 different examples, maybe more than that, in that article where they have been published, and yet the doctors the journal left out the details of the prayer. So there was one of them that involved a pretty remarkable cancer healing of a woman in Hawaii in 2000. Yeah, I think it was in like the 90s. And she'd had a kind of liposarcoma, which is a cancer of the fat cells that was removed. And it basically came back and metastasized to her lungs, which is, you know, very bad. And she didn't have any chemo. At that point, it had spread so far that she'd had a few months to live and they had no hope for her. So she goes and she prays to this particular grave of Father Damien, who was a venerable saint candidate who did a lot with leprosy. What am I looking for? Like groups in Hawaii. And so she prayed for his healing. And when she comes back 2 weeks later, the cancer is remotely completely gone from her lungs and started to shrink and from her body. And this was reported in the Hawaiian Medical Journal as a very strange case report. And if you just read it, it just talks about how on this date, the patient had this cancer screening. And on this date, it's 2 weeks later, it was gone. And this is strange. We're not really sure what the mechanism is, right? And they go into talking about mechanism in the paper of like theoretical ones. But the point is that it never mentions anything about the Catholic Church was investigating this for the canonization of Father Damien, right? Like the fact that this all happened there, all that would have been left out. If you were just reading this, you'd have no idea. So a lot of that just isn't included in these because it's seen as unnecessary, because unless you're going to make the argument that this is like caused by prayer, most journals just don't think that the faith of the person is relevant. And there's many, many examples again where this happened, where the person went and was instantly healed and it went away and the doctor notified that. But they say, well, maybe this was some weird remission. Maybe it was something we don't know. But the doctor just doesn't want to mention that it was after prayer, maybe because they'll get ridiculed for it. And that's the third reason, too, is that there is, whether we like to admit it or not, although I'm not at all like a conspiracy theorist, there is a bias in academia, right, to some extent. The argument for miracles is the least popular. And there are plenty of cases you can show where people got hugely criticized for publishing stuff. There was one in the Southern Medical Journal that the editor got fired for publishing in 2010. There was a study about fertility with birth rates when you pray for someone, and it got people wanted it removed from the journal, even though they had no evidence that it was fraudulent. Carlos Ayer recently, who's a Yale historian, award-winning, highly acclaimed in his field, published a book about Joseph of Cupertino levitating. And he got very negative book reviews from his colleagues saying, like, it's fine to talk about this from a historical perspective, but you can't act like it actually happened. Like that's when you've taken a step too far, Carlos, when you actually try to defend this happening historically. So all that being said, there's a lot of reasons why there's stigma and people leaving this stuff out, but it is actually more common than you'd expect. And there are examples you can give where it's past peer review and they just didn't mention the prayer aspect, but the medical documentation was solid. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that I don't know if I have an answer to right now to figure out, but basically the open question of how many times do we actually have a miracle that's actually medically documented, but nobody talks about it because it's not been properly classified. I can only imagine.
Miracles are certainly heavily underreported. So just this past week, I was on vacation with some family members, and they asked what I was researching, and I told them I'm looking into miracles. And then they just started sharing stories such that if events actually transpired as they described, they were definitely miraculous. But these are just stories that they haven't told very many people because they think, well, no one's going to believe me. It seems really implausible. And anyway, I know it was a miracle, so I don't need other people to, affirm me in order to know that this was a divine intervention in my life. And so I think I would just encourage people to go and talk to their religious family members or their religious friends and just ask them if they have any experiences that they would consider miraculous. And some of them will say yes. And some of the cases they describe will be absolutely unreal.
Yeah,
So-
I just had a pastor at my church last week to literally talk about that. And then he had everyone in the church raise their hand, and there was probably maybe 15% or so like that had personally witnessed like a miracle. So I just say touch grass, get off of Reddit atheist, touch grass, go to a congregation and talk to people for 5 minutes, and I promise you can find miracle claims.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's funny because literally just last week I was talking to somebody, and their child had a broken arm. They have an X-ray that confirmed it, and they prayed for it. And apparently, the kid's arm, which she had no movement for it or anything, it was magically better after prayer. Basically, now whether or not this actually happened, right? We don't have medical records afterwards confirming this. She had like they were ready to put the cast on and everything, and then next thing you know, she felt okay, and they didn't report it because the parents were like, "Well, we're just going to get a bunch of crap from the doctors. What if they call like CPS on us because we're not going to get a cast on our daughter after they confirm all these things were running through their head, right?" And so it sounds irrational. But
also, last thing is that these are in America, especially healthcare isn't cheap, and a lot of insurances will not pay for you to immediately. Like if you were healed, to have you go and like immediately get checked up afterwards to verify it. Like it's just not worth it for the money and the paperwork. So for many people, they know that they were healed and that's all they need. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but it's not that surprising why people don't want to go through the effort of having to do all of that because it's a lot of work.
Yeah. In my case, I mean, I'll just mention very briefly 3 cases that have been reported to me by friends and family. They include the instantaneous and miraculous reconstitution of a severed collarbone immediately following prayer. The resolution without treatment of severe juvenile structural scoliosis, which typically has like a very negative trajectory, almost like very often requires a back brace, surgery, and total resolution. So going from like a severe case of juvenile structural scoliosis to a back that, in the doctor's words, was straight as an arrow. So the complete disappearance of aberrant spinal curvature. And then a third case, a bloodied and broken nose, literally reconstituting itself over the course of about 5 seconds before someone's very eyes during prayer. Remember earlier we talked about, right, how the value of testimony in perceptually conducive circumstances. These are cases, like these are examples of perceptually conducive circumstances, and sometimes there are medical professionals involved to confirm that recovery has taken place. And again, these are 3 stories that, as far as I know, haven't been widely shared. And the subjects of these alleged miraculous healings have not gone out of their way to, either collect or promulgate the evidence for them. And so I think, like, if we actually knew about all the alleged miracles that have occurred and had all the evidence, it would just be like completely staggering. Like this is way.
Keener's 2-volume books back there. That's 1,100 pages of just testimony after testimony. And obviously that doesn't scratch the surface. So I'm not saying that all of them are credible, but like when you just have so many, it's like, sure, like the probability of at least a few of them being credible was fairly high.
Right. And again, to go back to a point we were making earlier, it is not reasonable for skeptics to approach the evidence for miracles with a prior so low that they're willing to reject just about any testimony, because it's just the prevalence of miracle claims is so great that you should have a non-negligible prior that God exists and heals people. It's just, in my opinion, it's just intellectually irresponsible to start out with a prior so low that you're not even going to look into the evidence, or you're just going to reject the testimony no matter what it contains.
Yep.
Awesome. And then I guess the last one we can cover is the whole idea of like other miracle claims from other religions, whether it be Hinduism, Islam or anything like that. Like the typical response that I always have here is show me one. Actually show me a credible miracle report where we can actually look through the testimony, we can look through any records, any of this stuff. I've searched far and wide, and I really haven't found anything that really matches the strength of Christian ones. But I don't know if you guys have come across anything.
I can think of
But how do
maybe
you-
a handful, but it is kind of hard to find. You're right, and a lot of it is just not as well documented. Part of that's because there are other religions like Hinduism or Islam are often not in the developed world either, so just in definition, harder to get documentation. But you're right, we don't have that structural approach that like the Catholic Church has or the Pentecostal investigators do. So even if I granted a few pretty extraordinary ones in other religions, I don't think the quantity or the quality. I mean, again, like the article I'm doing now on Zaytun, I do say it's the greatest miracle in history. I'm not even exaggerating when I talk about how many people. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not a million people. I don't think you have anything in any religion outside Christianity that I'm aware of that gets anywhere near that. The closest analogy we'll find is like a few people who saw cracks in a wall and they thought it was of a particular Hindu god or something. I don't think that's comparable to hundreds of thousands of people seeing the Virgin Mary repeatedly show up, bless people, move her hands. People can see her feet. They can shine lights on her, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into all the details here, but like it's wild stuff. So I don't think you just have the degree. You don't have anything, so far as I know. Well, I know people have tried to compare the sun miracle and Fatima to other things, but I think the scale of it is quite big. So it's pretty remarkable. I don't know of any like stigmatic case outside of Padre Pio and the one in Damascus where like in other religions or anything comparable with wound healing. It's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my experience has been similar to Caleb's. I've looked into claims of Buddhist miracles, and I found most of those wanting. Some of them are a little strange, a little bit hard to explain, but I haven't found anything that even approaches the quality of the evidence for vindicatory Christian miracles or vindicatory Catholic miracles. Now, just like a methodological note, in order to mount a miracle case against Christianity, then in order to do that, you're going to have to rule out 3 potential explanations of the data pertaining to any alleged non-Christian miracle. One explanation is that the phenomenon is just naturalistically explicable. Obviously, that's something you're going to have to rule out. A second thing you're going to have to rule out is that this was just a miracle of compassion worked by the creator God, the God of Christianity, in response to a sincere request made in faith by one of his creatures, right? Because many of these other religions are theistic or they have theistic strains. And some of the people who experience these alleged miracles are praying to the creator God. Now, they might have misconceptions about God. They might have lots of false beliefs about the being to whom they're appealing. But I believe that being exists and he can hear them, right? And I believe that God has compassion on his creatures. And so, like, if a Muslim prays for healing and gets it, that doesn't bother me. In fact, I think that probably does happen. I would be surprised to learn that no Muslim has ever been healed by God after asking for it.
Sorry to cut you off just really quickly. One of the things that's really interesting about Islam, though, is, and it's not every school of Islam that's like this, but the majority of them that you interact with and the majority of the Muslims that you will interact with, they don't actually believe that Allah performs miracles. They actually don't. They think that the extent, the boundary of how Allah would interact with creation would be through dreams or something like that. And so if a Muslim actually prayed for healing, it would actually seem to be contradictory to the predominant schools of Islam.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
We know how a lot of Muslims convert to Christianity is because they happen to dream of Jesus appearing to them, and so in a lot of countries. I actually have a whole chapter on that in my Miracles book too, which is because there's not been a lot of data on that. It's pretty interesting to look at some of the surveys about some of the stories.
Yeah, they think that it would not be befitting of Allah's majesty, so to speak, or it'd be a violation of Tawheed for God to actually perform miracles like this. So especially when it comes to Islamic miracles. That's one of the things I always
It's also
bring
just
up.
very convenient, I think, especially with Muhammad, where he doesn't, until the hadith comes around, he also doesn't do miracles outside the Quran. So it's like, it does seem like if your religion's like, oh, it just in principle, our religion just doesn't really allow for miracles. It's like, oh, that seems very convenient.
Well, the Quran is the miracle in
Yeah.
Islam.
Yeah, because the Virgin Mary appearing to 100,000 people is comparable to the number 19 being repeated a certain number of times in this text.
Or special Arabic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
Sorry, Noah, keep going.
Oh, right. So 2 things you need to rule out. First, you need to rule out that the phenomenon is naturalistically explicable. Second, you need to rule out that it's a miracle of compassion performed by the Christian God. The third thing you're going to have to do is rule out a diabolical deception. And Christianity teaches that there are false signs and wonders worked by malevolent spirits. This isn't something Christians like to talk about because many of them think it's embarrassing. I actually think that the empirical evidence for the existence of demons is very strong. If anybody's interested in reading about this, I would recommend the book Demonic Foes by Dr. Richard Gallagher. He's a board-certified psychiatrist. He's on the faculty at
Columbia, I think.
Columbia, I believe. Right. Yeah. He did his undergraduate in classics at Princeton. And he was an expert consultant on Catholic exorcisms for many years. And in that book, he gives his testimony to many of the things that he saw, which include like phenomena that are clearly not possible naturalistically, like subjects who suddenly become fluent in unknown or even dead languages, people levitating, feet in the air. We're talking about, again, things that if they happened as reported, right, that's something you're going to have to judge for yourself by looking at the testimony. But if they happened as reported, then there definitely are malevolent spirits. So I think the empirical evidence for this is very good. And again, it's something that Christianity teaches, that there will be false signs and wonders worked by malevolent spirits. And so people mounting a miraculous case against Christianity are going to have to show that the cases they're interested in can't be explained in that way. Now, we do run into a problem here, right? If we don't have criteria we can use to distinguish genuine miracles from diabolical deceptions. But we do have such criteria. So here are some that we can use. First, there are some miracles that just exceed the powers of demons. Now, there's varied opinions about this, but we can look to the miracles of Jesus as paradigms, right? So there's certain miracles that Jesus performs in the New Testament that he just says, or at least very strongly implies, are sufficient for knowledge that he was sent by God. So when he heals the paralytic who's lowered through the roof, he says to the Pharisees who are standing by, so that you may know that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins, I say to you, take up your mat and walk. What does that imply? Well, that just implies that if somebody is healed completely and instantaneously of paralysis, that's the work of God, right? Similarly with the healing of blindness in John chapter 9, similarly with the resurrection of Lazarus in John chapter 11, I believe, right? So if we have miracles of that quality, we can conclude, okay, maybe they exceed the power of demons and so aren't plausibly attributable to diabolical deception. That's one criterion we can use. Another criterion we can use is the fruits test. So Jesus says, here's how you can tell the difference between true prophets and false prophets. True prophets bear good fruit, false prophets bear bad fruit. And so in some of these Christian cases, like in Christian miracles that are associated with a seer, that are associated with a prophet or a prophetess, we can just look and see that they're living lives of extraordinary virtue. So take St. Padre Pio, for example, the greatest miracle worker, arguably since Christ. Padre Pio was, by all accounts, an extremely humble guy, extremely kind, extremely generous with his time, a lover of God, a lover of mankind. And then you can contrast this with cases of people who we
Muhammad.
Christians would want to say are false prophets, right?
Muhammad, we don't think
and,
names there. Joseph Smith or...
with all due respect to the Mormons in the audience, Joseph Smith, I do not think that his character meets the fruits test. And so what you would really need to mount a miraculous case against Christianity is something like the following. You have a person, a prophet or a prophetess, who lives a life of extraordinary virtue, who claims to speak for God, who delivers messages that are incompatible with Christianity, and whose messages are vindicated by extraordinary signs of a kind that exceed the power of malevolent spirits. And I just don't know of any case that that even begins to approach that. But I can give a ton of cases that meet those criteria on the Christian side or on the Catholic side.
Yeah.
And so I just think, I think there's a massive asymmetry in the empirical evidence, at least the evidence that I'm familiar with. And granted, my knowledge is incomplete, but yeah.
Right.
Those are some boxes you're going to have to check if you really want to press this critique all the way.
I love that. That was really good. Anything else, Caleb?
On that, or just in general?
In general, yeah.
No, I guess.
Well, I guess on that, because I have one more question for both of you. That's sort of an objection.
I didn't know if you're gonna get like spontaneous remission and stuff like that, but that might get a bit more into the.
We're at the hour 50-minute mark. I want to be respectful of no.
Yeah,
time.
you're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay, say something about spontaneous remission.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just say that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, to say that a condition spontaneously remitted is just to say that it went away unexpectedly.
Yeah,
that's compatible with the unexpected resolution of the condition being a miracle. The spontaneous remission is the thing that needs to be explained, not the thing that does the explaining.
Not a mechanism. Yeah, people often.
Right,
I mean, sometimes it can be the case that the body can heal itself, but like that's not the definition of a spontaneous remission. Spontaneous by definition means like uncaused, and then remission is when it goes away. I was also say fun fact when people. So you're absolutely right. Know about that. Another thing people don't often realize is one of the very first. I don't know if it's like the earliest. One of the very first cases ever of spontaneous remission comes from the 13th century from, I think it was a monk or a priest who had a gangrenous leg that had like a bunch of tumors that were oozing, and he prays the night before the surgery, and after that, the day of the surgery, his tumors are gone. And so another term for spontaneous remission of cancer is literally called Saint Persinger. I think it's Persinger or something like, what was Peringer maybe, something like that. Tumors, but you can look it up because it's actually like the name of Peregrine, Saint Peregrine. He's also the saint of cancer patients as well. But so that's actually in the medical literature, it gets sometimes called the Saint Peregrine tumor if it goes away on its own because that's one of the first cases where it did. So it's kind of, so we shouldn't say it's always irreligious either when it happens. So fun fact.
All right. So then the last question I have for you guys, and it doesn't have to be in depth, it's more of like a question of the falsifiability here, right? So like for any of the cases that you have that you believe in that are actually authentic miracles, what would it take to change your mind?
That's a good question. I mean, I think one would just be like if everyone just came out and said that they lied about it and, they weren't coerced to say that. I mean, that would be like an obvious one. I think if you could find a plausible naturalist.
What a way to freeze. It might be a second till he comes back if you want to say anything on your end, Noah. Oh, no, right. He's back.
Oh, he's back.
Yeah.
I know. I was talking and I know it froze so that way. What was I even saying about the?
Naturalistic explanation.
I think if you could find something that had like natural parallels where you can find this particular illness going away in a similar manner, like in secular context, like at a relatively reasonable rate, I think that would give you pause. I think that it's important that it's like medically unprecedented.
Oh, Caleb.
Miracle. You have to really look at it.
There you go.
Case by case basis.
All right, you froze a little bit, but I think people understood what you said there. Still, no, anything on your end?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of things. So one would just be confessions from the subject of the miracle or witnesses to the miracle that they fabricated evidence. Another would be that the condition returns, right? Mm-hmm. Because one of the things we want to see in an alleged case of miraculous healing is that the condition remits permanently. So that's something that would at least lower my confidence, right? Another, as Caleb pointed out, would be plausible naturalistic explanations of the healing. Another would be evidence that the healing was a diabolical deception, like evidence that the person in question was involved in the occult or was living a life of secret sin. That would raise the probability that they were involved with malevolent supernatural forces. I mean, I could keep listing things. I think what people want to say is, oh, these cases are unfalsifiable, but they're just not.
Yeah, exactly.
There are things that would lower my confidence, and I could list them forever.
I will say with the permanency one, though, I agree with that in principle, but like, could someone be devil's advocate and say, well, Lazarus died again? But like, what I'm saying, like, I don't think you have to have necessarily like perfect health forever, right? Like they can obviously get
Yeah.
sick and die again, but
Yeah,
not
yeah.
from that particular illness, or at least
Right.
not.
There's definitely nuance there.
Yeah.
Because like you could be healed from blindness, and the next thing you know, it's like you got stabbed in the eye, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
Right.
Unrelated. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think
So-
that would move me very much. But
Exactly.
and again, like sometimes when people ask what would falsify your hypothesis, they're looking for a piece of evidence that would drive the probability of the hypothesis to 0 or to nearly 0. But actually, very often hypotheses are not falsifiable in that sense. So, like, here's a hypothesis. My wife is at Trader Joe's right now. Why do I believe that? Well, because she told me. Well, actually, that is pretty straightforwardly falsifiable, because if I looked out the window, I could see her and she wouldn't be there. But anyway, in order for it to be possible to confirm a hypothesis, it does need to be possible to disconfirm a hypothesis. So there is something to the idea that in order to be credible, a claim has to be falsifiable. But it doesn't have to be falsifiable in the sense that there's some bit of evidence that would drive the probability of the hypothesis to 0 or near 0. There just needs to be some information that could in principle count against it.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true in these cases. Yes, I can imagine things that would count against the claim that the alleged healing or the alleged apparition or the alleged what have you was miraculous.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to finish off with super chats here, and then we'll finish things off. More Shekels by Pascal Powers. Methodological naturalism, I'm assuming is what that is, assumes time sans static world. It doesn't predict our laws versus laws with sufficient causes, overgenerates effects by the
Can
negation.
you
of reducing
translate that
possibilities
for
space of
those of us who are scared of math?
I'm trying to translate it in my head right now. I think he's just trying to. I think, man, Cosmic, you tried to cram in a lot of stuff here in a super chat.
He didn't want to pay more than $5, so he only had so many characters.
Assumes that time sans static world doesn't predict laws versus laws with sufficient. I don't know what you're trying to say here, man. Do you have an idea, Noah?
I'm not sure what this means.
Yeah, sorry, Cosmic. Email me. More Shekels. Caleb is awesome. You're wrong.
Agreed.
Hey, I got Noah
No,
on the
Caleb.
program because I wanted to promote Noah because he's very underrated and should
Yes, Noah's great
have
too.
a lot more attention. So I appreciate
Um,
Oh, thanks, guys.
Noah,
I do
no,
like
I'm sure you
attention.
picked up by now. I'm sure you picked up by now that Caleb and I's friendship is. We're very close, but we
it.
also
I
make
feel like
fun
in our
of each other
group
a
chats,
lot.
I'm always so mean to him. I'm like, if they didn't know that we were friends, they'd think I'm just the biggest like jerk.
Yes,
I'm always
can't
self-conscious about how
confirm
mean
I've
I am to you.
witnessed this.
It's like I probably
That's testimony, though, so it doesn't count. How do we know that Mary's claims affirming the How do we know that Mary's claims affirming the papacy, purgatory, and her immaculate heart verbatim at Fatima are true? Ethan Muse interview went.
That's a Noah question.
Yeah, I mean, there's more than one way to take this question. Maybe you're asking, how can we know that we have verbatim what Mary actually said to the children? Maybe there was a transcription error or a translation error that changed the content of the messages. I'm not too worried about that because the Catholic implications of the messages from Fatima really don't depend on, they really don't depend too much on the details of the wording. So, like, the so-called second secret of Fatima just says, I want you to tell the Holy Father to consecrate the churches of Russia to my, i.e. Mary's, Immaculate Heart, so that war and apostasy will be averted. That's just unambiguous. That's not going to be resolved by, that's not going to be due to a translation error, almost certainly. And the same thing with some of these other.
Yeah.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Purgatory, and I'm just reading what they wrote.
Right. Now, I don't know of any messages associated with Fatima that vindicate the doctrine of purgatory. Now,
I
there
think it came
are.
when she showed them a vision of hell. I think she mentioned praying for souls in purgatory. I'd have to look at what was discussed. I could be wrong on that, but there may have been some
Yeah,
reference. Padre Pio did, though, at least.
he did, right. And in those cases, so Padre Pio claims that souls in purgatory appeared to him to request that masses be said on their behalf so that they could enter beatitude. So again, that's not the sort of thing that depends on really precise wording or that could plausibly be a mistake due to like an error of transcription or translation. Now, another thing you could be asking is, granted that we actually do have an accurate record of what was said by the apparitions, how can we know that those messages are true? Like, how can we know that the messages are actually divine? And then I'm just going to advert to the theology of miracles. I'm going to say the New Testament clearly teaches that miraculous vindication is sufficient for knowledge that the contents of a religious message are true. And then I'm just going to point to all the empirical evidence for the miracles associated with Our Lady of Fatima and with these other seers and saints, and say, yeah, for the same reason that we should believe Jesus because he raised Lazarus from the dead, we should also believe the contents of these messages because they were attended by miracles.
Cool.
Chat agreed. Fan, you got to lose the shirt, bro. It's not happening, man.
I'm not opposed to that. I think that would be
the only way
more subscribers for that. But you got to make that like
the only way you guys will see that is when I do my next bodybuilding show and somehow stumble across pictures of me on stage.
There you go.
Other than that, modesty is the hottesty. So
yeah. There you go.
Fan, I don't know if you got my email, but I'm wondering if you have any recommended readings on God's relationship to time. I will check my email address and then I will.
You didn't read the bark though. I know Michael is not here to
oh, bark.
Is that a meme that you all have going on with
I told you the origin story of that.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
No, just for your context, people like to bark as a joke and a meme now with Inspiring Philosophy, because one time we opened up our stream and Mike was like, we need to get like a intro line or something like that. This is just boring. And then I just impulsively screamed, "Bark with me if you're my puppies." And it just stuck ever since.
Wow. I like it.
There you go. Somebody likes it. Vindicatory miracles affirm the Roman Catholic Church. If a message from heaven isn't good enough, what else would non-cats want? What's the point of
non-Catholics? I think is what non-cats.
Yeah. Oh, okay. What's the point of apologetics if people avoid the best miracles?
I think he just agrees with what Noah and pretty much everyone else has said. If a message isn't like, if Mary and or Jesus coming down and giving you theology directly through miracles isn't good enough, then I don't know. Like, are you really going to be more convinced by the Immaculate Conception because of some vague discussion about this Greek word means this, and then the history and all the debates on this theologically, versus Mary just saying, yes, I am the Immaculate Conception? Like, surely that should have some weight to it, you know? But
yeah. And I mean, some of these affirmations are super explicit. So again, the case that I'm going to talk about in a couple of weeks involves apparitions of Christ saying things like, she, i.e. Mary, is my mother. Whoever venerates her venerates me, and whoever denies her denies me.
Ooh.
And pray for the sinners who forgive sins in my name and who reject my mother. And so I just don't know. I mean, sorry, I didn't intend to come on this stream and like mount the miracle case for Catholicism, but since people are directly asking about it, I do think this is really like the best you could hope for if you're Catholic and if you're Catholic curious. Like, if you're just wondering which religion is true, it's kind of awesome that it seems like God just sometimes shows up and identifies which religion is true and then corroborates that identification with really spectacular signs that are very well documented and that you can read about. So,
yep, 100%. And you don't have to apologize for that, Noah. All right, last one. Lamb Apologetics says, I find the vindicatory criterion of miracles moot in the sense that, at the very least, they are metaphysically implicative, even if they are weak diagnostically. I'd appeal to historical data at this point.
So he thinks the historical data is stronger than.
I'm trying to figure out what he means by
There's
this.
more interpretation. I think theological miracles maybe is what he means.
I'm not
That
sure.
seems really strange to me though, because I feel like if you just look at the history of these debates historically, they're all over the place, and you can find competent scholars on both sides. So it seems like to be more confident in the historical data from thousands of years ago seems very unusual.
Lamb,
systemically.
I think we're struggling to figure out what you're trying to say here. So if you want an answer to this, you can just message me more laid out what you're thinking, and I can just send these guys the explanation of the super chat, and then I'll just get it back to you. I think that's gonna be the best way to go about things, because we got to log off here anyway. All right, guys, any final comments before we sign off?
I do just want to say, I have been watching Inspiring Philosophy for 11 years.
Wow.
And one of the very first YouTube videos I ever watched was Mike's video about the compatibility of the creation account in Genesis with contemporary biology. And that was very helpful to me. So yeah, thank you guys for all the work that you do and for having me on the show. And I thought that the conversation was really fun and illuminating. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to having you back on.
Yeah, thanks to God for providing us with just an abundance of riches when it comes to the evidence for miracles.
That's awesome. Thane, you gotta have him do like a mentor thing or like something with the Academy on like the epistemic arguments for morality or something like that, because he's really good at that area too, I think. I really want to be promoting and get your stuff out there, because I think you're super underrated, and I think that we want to just amp up our forte here in terms of our militant apologists. So
yeah, Noah, if you don't know, because we started like a thing called School. If you know what school communities are, like SKOOL, where people can take classes and things like that. So if you have anything that you want to work on, that you want to get out into the populace and actually teach these things, we can talk about that offline too if you want to.
Yeah. Anything
else, Caleb?
Thank God for miracles.
Heck yeah, brother.
Amen.
All right. Yeah. Well, Noah, I know you got to get going. I smell dinner upstairs, so I'm really hungry now too. I'm going to end the stream. God bless you all.
Thanks,
Please
guys.
remember to like and subscribe, like the video, share it around, all that jazz, and comment after. God bless.
You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.